The celebration was the first thing that felt wrong. My sister had texted me 3 days before I flew home, said my niece had run off with some boy she met online, said the police were handling it, said not to worry. I landed at Portland International on a Tuesday morning. My brother-in-law picked me up at arrivals. He was driving a new F-250, black, crew cab. The kind with the leather seats and the sunroof. The kind that cost $60,000, maybe $65,000 depending on the package. He'd been out of work since March. I didn't say anything about the truck. I asked about my niece. He said she'd probably turn up. Said teenagers do this kind of thing. Said it with the same energy you'd use talking about a late pizza delivery. I watched his hands on the wheel the whole drive to the house. Steady. Not a tremor, not a single tell. My sister met us at the door. She looked like she hadn't slept, which was the first normal thing I'd seen. She hugged me too long, cried a little. I held onto her and looked over her shoulder at the kitchen counter. A bottle of Maker's Mark. 2 glasses. One still had lipstick on the rim. They'd been drinking before I got there. My niece had been missing for 11 days. I served 8 years as a Navy SEAL. 2 combat deployments, 1 classified operation I still can't talk about, and 4 years as a federal contractor doing work I also can't talk about. When I got out, I built a private security firm that now employs 43 people. We do executive protection, corporate threat assessment, and the occasional contract that keeps me from getting too comfortable. I know what grief looks like. I know what fear looks like. I know what fear looks like. What I saw in that kitchen was neither. My niece's name is Hazel. She's 16. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that fills up whatever room she's in. She keeps an EpiPen in her backpack because she's allergic to tree nuts. She's been dancing since she was 4. She leaves her water bottles everywhere. I went upstairs to her room while my sister and brother-in-law sat in the kitchen and talked about whether they should hire a private investigator. I stood in the doorway for a minute. Her bed was made. That was strange. Hazel doesn't make her bed. I've known this child her entire life. She has never once made her bed voluntarily. Someone else made that bed. I opened her closet. Her dance bag was there. She would not have run away without her dance bag. She had a regional competition in 6 weeks. She'd been talking about it since September. I checked the bathroom, her toothbrush, her face wash, her specific brand of shampoo that she ordered online because the store brand version gave her a rash. All of it was still there. I went back downstairs. I asked my brother-in-law when he bought the truck. He said 2 weeks ago. I asked him how. He said he'd gotten some money back from an investment. I asked what investment. He looked at my sister. She looked at her glass. I went outside. I stood in the driveway for a while. I called a man named Victor, who was my team leader for the better part of 6 years and now runs a consulting operation out of Boise. I told him what I was looking at. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You need to start with the money?" I went back inside. I told my sister I was going to look around a little. Just to help, she nodded and said that would be nice. I went through the house methodically, not aggressively, just carefully, the way you move through a space when you're trying to understand it. I found the receipt in the office. It was in a manila envelope in the bottom drawer of my brother-in-law's desk underneath a stack of old utility bills. I almost missed it. The envelope wasn't labeled. I opened it. It was a wire transfer confirmation. $4,800. Sent from a business account I didn't recognize. A company called Meridian Asset Solutions, LLC. Received by my brother-in-law's personal checking account 17 days ago, 4 days before Hazel disappeared. I sat in the office chair for a long time. I looked at the amount. I looked at the date. I looked at the company name. $4,800. That was what they got for her. I didn't go back to the kitchen. I went to my car. I sat there for 20 minutes with my hands on the wheel and worked through every other possible explanation. Every one. I'm good at this. I've been trained to not assume, to look for the most likely truth, not the one that feels the most obvious. I couldn't find another explanation. I called Victor again, gave him the company name. He said he'd get back to me in an hour. He called back in 40 minutes. Meridian Asset Solutions, LLC, was registered in Nevada. Shell company, linked through 2 other shells to a man named Fletcher Holt. No criminal record. Owned a property management company in Vancouver, Washington. Also owned a 40-foot boat docked at the Columbia River Marina. Also had 4 prepaid cell phones registered to 4 different names. Victor said, "I know this name." I said, "How do you know this name?" He said there was a federal task force 2 years ago. They couldn't make anything stick. He's been operating since at least 2019. Girls, mostly. 15 to 19. He moves them fast. Out of state within 72 hours. I asked him how many. He said they thought at least a dozen confirmed. Probably more. I was quiet. He said, "You're not going to do anything stupid, right?" I said, "I'm going to find her." He said, "That's what I'm afraid of." I drove to Vancouver that evening. I had a duffel bag in the trunk that I keep packed. Old habit. I checked into a motel off Highway 99 and sat on the bed and thought about my sister making small talk in the kitchen while her daughter was God knows where, with God knows where, with God knows who. I thought about the F-250 in the driveway. I thought about Hazel's dance bag hanging in her closet. I opened my laptop and started working. Victor sent me everything he had on Holt within 2 hours. Property records, known associates, a couple of photos from surveillance that the task force had shared with him through a back channel. Holt was 51, silver-haired, the kind of face that looked trustworthy at a distance. He had a business partner named Kevin Marsh who handled logistics, meaning he moved the girls. Marsh had a record. 2 priors for trafficking in persons, both pled down to lesser charges. He'd served 14 months total across 2 sentences. 14 months. I drove past Holt's property management office the next morning. Glass front, nice signage, the kind of place that looks like it belongs in a Chamber of Commerce brochure. There was a receptionist visible through the window, a waiting area with magazines, a small succulent on the front desk. Normal, ordinary, invisible. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. You hide the worst things behind the most ordinary fronts. I didn't go in. I kept driving. I called a former colleague who now works in the FBI's Portland field office. We served together briefly during a joint operation in 2017. I told him what I had. He was quiet for a while. He said the Holt case was complicated. Said there were jurisdictional issues. Said there were ongoing things he couldn't discuss. I said, "My niece has been missing for 12 days. He said, "I hear you. I'm going to make a call. Don't do anything in the meantime." I said I wouldn't. I started surveillance on the marina that afternoon anyway. I'm not proud of every decision I made in the next 4 days. I'll say that plainly. I operated in a gray area that I understood the boundaries of, and I stayed inside those boundaries, but just barely. I didn't break into anything. I didn't hurt anyone. I watched. I documented. I put together a picture. Here's what the picture showed. Holt used the boat for meetings. He met Marsh there twice. He met a third man there once. A man I didn't initially recognize who drove a city vehicle. A white Chevy Impala with a municipal parking sticker on the bumper. I ran the plate through a contact who runs a skip tracing firm. The vehicle was registered to the city of Vancouver. The parking sticker was issued by the Clark County Public Works Department. I went back through Victor's files. There was a name. A county official who had appeared twice in the task force investigation as a peripheral connection. Someone who might have passed information about law enforcement activity to Holt's network. Never charged. Never formally identified as a suspect. The name was Harold Finch. Harold Finch was the Deputy Director of Clark County Community Services. He oversaw, among other things, the county's foster care liaison office. I sat in my car at the marina parking lot and felt something go cold inside me. Not rage. Rage would have been easier. This was something quieter and heavier than rage. This was the understanding that the system had not just failed these girls. It had been weaponized against them. On day 4, I got a lead. Victor had contacts in the recovery community, people who worked missing persons cases through unofficial channels. One of those contacts had heard something. A property outside of Ridgefield, maybe 20 miles north of Vancouver. Rural. Set back from the road. The kind of place where nobody looks and nobody asks. I drove past it that evening. Gravel driveway. A farmhouse setback maybe 300 yards from the road. A metal outbuilding to the east. 2 vehicles in the driveway. A panel van and a pickup I'd seen at the marina. I called Victor. He said, "You need to stop. You need to give this to your FBI contact right now." I said, "Hazel might be in that building." He said, "If you go in there wrong, she might not come out of it." I said, "I know." Long pause. He said, "I'm ho." Long pause. He said, "I'm 4 hours out." I said, "I know." He said, "Do not move until I get there." I didn't move. Victor arrived at 2 in the morning with 2 other men I'd worked with before. One of them was former Delta. One of them was former MARSOC. Neither of them asked many questions. That's the thing about people who've done serious work. They assess the situation, they determine the risk, and they make a decision. The sentiment comes later. We made a plan. Clean. Conservative. Victor pushed for FBI notification before entry and I agreed, because he was right. and because what I wanted to do personally had no place in what was actually going to help Hazel. I called my FBI contact at 3 in the morning, told him I had eyes on a property with probable cause, and at least one confirmed vehicle connection to Holt's network. Told him I had former federal contractors on site with me. Told him we were not going to wait until morning. He said, "Give me 90 minutes." He was there in 70. They went in at 4:47 a.m. Coordinated entry. I was not part of the breach. I was at the perimeter, which is where I needed to be, and I understood that, even if every part of me wanted to be the first one through that door. There were 3 men inside. 2 were detained without incident. The third attempted to run through the back of the property and was taken down in the field. There were 7 girls in the outbuilding. Hazel was one of them. She was the youngest. I heard her before I saw her. She was crying. She'd been crying for a while, I think, from the sound of it. That ragged, exhausted kind of crying that happens when you've been scared for too long. One of the agents was talking to her, keeping her calm, telling her she was safe. I came around the corner and she looked up, and for a second she just stared at me like she wasn't sure if I was real. Then she said my name, just my first name, and something in my chest cracked right down the middle. I don't have kids. I've thought about it. Haven't gotten there yet. But I know that whatever I felt in that moment is the closest I've ever come to understanding what it means to love someone so completely that their pain becomes physically unbearable to be near. She was okay. She was going to be okay. She needed a hospital, and a doctor, and eventually a therapist, and a lot of time, and a lot of patience. But she was alive. She was standing up. She was looking at me. That was everything. The investigation moved fast after that. Holt was arrested at his home at 6 that morning. March was picked up at a motel in Longview 2 hours later. Harold Finch was arrested at his office on Thursday, walked out in handcuffs past the receptionist and the Succulent and the Chamber of Commerce magazines. The wire records were the foundation. $4,800 traced back through Meridian Asset Solutions to a broader financial network that had processed payments for at least 19 confirmed victims over 3 years. The prosecutors got everything they needed and more. Fletcher Holt pled not guilty and was denied bail. The federal charges included sex trafficking of minors, transportation for purposes of sexual exploitation, and conspiracy. His attorney gave a statement outside the courthouse. I didn't watch it. Kevin Marsh cooperated. He gave up names, dates, locations, a whole operational picture that the task force had been trying to reconstruct for 2 years. He's going to spend a long time in federal prison regardless. Cooperation just determines how long. Harold Finch did not cooperate. He hired a very expensive attorney and said nothing. It didn't matter. The digital trail from his personal phone to Holt's network was extensive enough that his attorney eventually stopped talking about a trial and started talking about sentencing. My brother-in-law was arrested on a Wednesday. My sister called me while I was driving and told me before she'd fully processed what was happening. She kept saying, "They have it wrong. They must have it wrong." I didn't know what to say to her. I still don't, fully. I went to see her that evening. We sat in the kitchen, not at the counter where they'd been drinking, but at the kitchen table. She'd moved to the table. I don't know if she'd thought about that consciously. She asked me how long I'd known. I said I started to understand it the day I came home. She put her face in her hands and stayed like that for a long time. I sat there. I didn't fill the silence because there wasn't anything to fill it with. Eventually, she looked up and said, "She's really okay?" I said, "She's going to be." She nodded. She looked at her hands on the table. My brother-in-law was ultimately charged as a co-conspirator. He connected Holt's network to Hazel through a mutual contact, a man he'd met at a bar who'd introduced him to what was described in the charging documents as a placement opportunity. He'd received $4,800 and kept $2,000 and used the rest as a down payment on the truck. He sold his daughter for less than the truck cost. I've thought about that a lot. Not because I'm trying to understand it. I don't think I'm ever going to understand it. I think about it because I want to make sure I never stop being angry about it. Because being angry about it is the appropriate response, and the day I stop being angry about it is the day I've made peace with something that should never have peace made with it. His sentencing is in April. The federal guidelines are significant. His attorney is arguing for a reduction based on the degree of his direct involvement. The prosecutors are arguing that facilitating the initial transfer makes him as culpable as anyone else in the chain. I hope the judge sees it that way too. Hazel is in therapy twice a week. She's back home with my sister, who is trying to figure out how to hold her family together with one of its central pieces removed. It's hard. Some days are harder than others. I call every Sunday. Some Sundays we talk for an hour. Some Sundays we just stay on the line for a while and don't say much. She started dancing again last month. Just the studio classes for now. Nothing competitive yet. But she went back. She walked in and put on her shoes and she went back. I don't know how to articulate what it means to watch someone choose to go back. I've been asked a few times now whether I regret any of it, whether I'd do it differently. The honest answer is that I'd move faster. I spent 2 days convincing myself I was wrong because I didn't want to be right. I know what that cost. I think about it. But there's another question underneath that one that nobody has quite asked me directly, and it's the one I've spent the most time with. It's this. When I was standing at the perimeter of that property at 4 in the morning, knowing what was in that outbuilding, knowing who would put her there, did I want to be the one to end it permanently? Yes. I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, I did. I didn't. I made the call. I followed the process. I stood at the perimeter and I let the people whose job it is do their job because that's how this is supposed to work. And because what I wanted personally was not the same as what Hazel needed, and those two things needed to stay separate. But I want you to understand the distance between what I wanted and what I did. And I want you to understand that closing that distance took everything I had. The system failed these girls for years. It failed them through negligence, and it failed them through active corruption, and it failed them through bureaucratic indifference. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Harold Finch had been passing information to Holt's network for at least 2 years while sitting in a county office that was supposed to protect vulnerable children. That is not a minor institutional failure. That is something that should make all of us look hard at the structures we trust and the people we put inside them. But the system also put Holt in federal custody. It put Marsh in custody. It put Finch in custody. It got 7 girls out of that building and into hospitals and eventually into homes. The system is not the enemy. The people who corrupted it are the enemy. I believe that. I need to believe that. Because if I stop believing it, the alternative is that I should have done something very different at 4 in the morning in that field. And I don't think the man I want to be goes down that road. Hazel asked me once, about 3 weeks after everything, whether I was angry at her mom. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said, "Your mom didn't know." She said, "How do you know she didn't know?" I said, "Because I know your mom. And because the look on her face when she found out is not something you can fake." Hazel thought about that. Then she said, "I'm still angry at her." I said, "That's okay. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to feel everything you're feeling. There's no wrong answer right now." She nodded. She looked out the window. She said, "I'm glad you came home." I said, "There was never a version of this where I didn't." She looked back at me and something in her face shifted. Not all the way, not healed, but something. I'm going to hold on to that. If you're watching this and you know something, if you've seen something that didn't sit right, if someone in your life has gone missing and the people around you aren't acting the way they should, trust what you know. Ask the hard questions. Don't let the appearance of normalcy talk you out of what you're seeing. The most dangerous thing isn't the obvious monster. It's the ordinary-looking door you walk past every day, because nothing about it tells you to stop. Stop. Look at the door. If I can do one thing with what happened to my family, let it be that. Let it be that someone out there sees what I'm saying and decides to look at the door. Hazel is going to be okay. I am going to make sure of it. I've been asked what it took away from all of this. People want a clean answer, something they can write down or repeat to someone else. I understand the impulse. When something terrible happens, we want it to have meant something. We want a wreckage to at least produce a lesson. Here's the truest thing I can say. Every single outcome in this story, good and bad, came directly from a choice someone made. My brother-in-law made a choice. He met a man in a bar who offered him money, and he chose to take it. He didn't stumble into it. He didn't get tricked in any way that removes his responsibility. He saw an opportunity to get something he wanted, and he took it, and he told himself whatever story he needed to tell himself to get through that decision. That's how most betrayals work. Not with a dramatic moment of evil, with a quiet, private negotiation between what a person wants and what they're willing to do to get it. He lost that negotiation, and everything that followed was the consequence of that choice moving forward through the world in the way that choices do. Harold Finch made a choice too. 100 small ones probably before the big one. Each one slightly easier than the last because the previous one had already moved the line. That's the thing about moral erosion. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens incrementally, in small doses, until one day you're a public official passing intelligence to a trafficking network and you've talked yourself into believing you're still a reasonable person. I made choices too, I want to be honest about that. I chose to trust what I was seeing instead of what I was being told. I chose to start asking questions instead of accepting the comfortable version of events. And I chose at 4 in the morning in a field in Ridgefield to make the call instead of making the other choice that was available to me. That last one cost me more than I usually admit out loud. Hazel made a choice when she came back to the studio. She didn't have to. Nobody would have said a word if she'd never walked through that door again. But she put on her shoes and she went back, and that act, that one small deliberate act, is the most courageous thing I witnessed through this entire ordeal. More than the operation. More than the arrests. A 16-year-old girl deciding that what was done to her would not be the final word on who she was. That is the kind of strength that isn't given. It's built. Quietly, privately, one decision at a time. I think about Hazel every time I'm tempted to let something go that I shouldn't. Every time I'm tired and it would be easier to look away. She didn't get the option to look away. The least I can do is not take it when I have it. If there's anything worth passing forward from what happened to my family, it's this. Pay attention to what you know, not just what you're told. Trust the discomfort. The ordinary-looking thing that feels slightly wrong usually is, and when you find out you were right, when the thing behind the ordinary door is as bad as you feared, don't let what you want personally get confused with what actually needs to happen. Hazel needed me present and clear-headed, not satisfied. Those are different things. I chose the one that was actually useful. She's dancing again. That's what I hold on to.